Welcome to Horror Makes Us Happy, the podcast where we ask the question, what is it about horror that makes us happy? Your hosts are Steve Becker and myself, Chris Whitman, and you can find out more about us at our website, horrormakesushappy.com. Before we get started, this is the trigger warning. This is a horror podcast. We're going to be talking about messed up stuff, but in case you didn't know, we delve into things of the horror and macabre nature, so we could discuss topics that may or may not be not suitable for children. Yeah, we'll go with that one.
Triggers.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about some messed up stuff that could involve subjects, like murder, rape, child abuse. So if that's not your cup of tea, then
GTFO.
Or think about it for a second and listen, because it is also interesting. It's fun in a messed up way.
Caveat that.
All right. Now, with that out of the way, coming up, we're going to be speaking with president of Rue Morgue website, Rodrigo Godinho, staff writer for Dread Central, Tyler Dupay, and Twitch streamer Harry Horror. But for today, we have the company of Mr. Eduardo Sanchez, director-producer of certain works such as this thing called the Blair Witch Project. You might have heard of it. Segment in VHS2. What was it, A Walk in the Park, you said?
A ride. I think it was A Ride in the Park, but A Walk in the Park sounds good too.
Yeah, A Ride is better. He did ride the zombie park one. You know which one I'm talking about. And Exists, which was awesome.
Welcome
to the show. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
our pleasure. I don't know how much we've gone back and forth a few times with the conversation, so I don't remember how much we've told you about the theme of the podcast. But basically, what we do is we ask a bunch of questions about your childhood, teenage years, and adulthood, and try to figure out what it is about horror that you, as a person, individually appreciate and love. So, starting with childhood, what are some of your earliest memories of scary things?
Well, we came from Cuba. I got to the country when I was like 5 years old, and my mom was very protective, especially being in a foreign country. I think she kind of just worried about everything that she didn't know the language. My father didn't know the language, so I think she went into like overprotective mode. So was kind of like instilled this fear of like in me that like I could get abducted at any minute. So like my early childhood kind of fears are just about being alone, especially in public. Like I would get lost in Kmart. I would go out to the toy section and I couldn't find my mom and I would just start like sobbing. Those are my earliest memories of like fear. And then my mom was, also my parents were very religious. And I remember we watched The Exorcist. This was like, I guess probably the first time The Exorcist had been on TV. I don't know if it was like the late 70s, but I remember being so young that I was sitting on my mom's lap. But it was like a family affair, man. Like everybody came to the house. And so like for us, it was like, the way The Exorcist was set up was that this is real. Like if you, because, obviously if you believe in Jesus and you believe in all that stuff, then you have to believe in Satan. And the idea that there's like this evil entity out there trying to get you is just, really scary for kids. And I think that's why The Exorcist is so scary to so many people. So for me, it was like The Exorcist was treated more as a documentary than as a, narrative film. Mm-hmm. So I remember that scaring the hell out of me. And then I mostly shied away from like slasher movies, but I remember I went to see Friday the 13th in 3D, which is like probably the first Friday the 13th movie I saw in the theater. It was just not a good experience for me. I just did not like it. I just, it was like, there's still a lot of like imagery from that movie that it definitely like, stayed with me. And so I mostly just shied away from horror movies. Like I liked, I loved The Shining and kind of the classics. Like I remember watching Amityville Horror. That was kind of a fun, scary movie. So I liked horror movies, like Jaws, which I guess you could call a horror movie, one of my favorite films. The Changeling was an early movie that I really loved. But yeah, mostly as a kid, scared of, the basic things. I was scared of Bigfoot. Bigfoot scared the crap out of me when I was little. I thought that he was going to be coming in. We had some like a little strip of woods behind my apartment complex. And I was sure that Bigfoot, lived back there. So that was
He was very popular in the 70s or 80s.
Oh, yeah. Well, Bigfoot
was like 70s. Like, Patterson-Gimlin was like 1967, I think. You know, the Bigfoot walking across the famous, footage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I guess it was like the first time that it was like that, really like the first found footage piece of film, and I'm sure there's stuff earlier than that, but something where like unless you believe it's a real Bigfoot, which, again, like there's this, I love that piece of footage because like it really does look really genuine. You know what I mean? Like it does not look like somebody in a suit, like especially for that, the 60s.
Yeah, I was gonna say, especially for that era. We didn't have
like now
CGI
you're like, okay,
or
if you show
Photoshop.
that now, you're like, okay, there's CG, there's all kinds of things you can do, but that suit looked pretty damn good, man. And knowing, because I did exist and we spent a ton of money on our suit, it looked really great, but we spent, over $100,000 on that suit, all said and done. So I was like, man, that's a damn impressive suit. But anyway, just that footage, it was like the first time that like something fantastical like that had been like, it was, we were told that it was real. You know what I mean? Like we were told that, oh, this, these guys got this footage of this creature. And it just like freaked me out, but it also like kind of blew my mind, So I was like, got into like UFOs and, anything like ghosts. I was a big fan of that show In Search Of when I was a kid, though it, would routinely scare the crap out of me. There was this like level of interest. So I guess that those are the kinds of things that really, scared me as a kid.
It's funny that you mentioned that clip about Bigfoot potentially being the first found footage. I'd never really thought about that.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about what else there might be, but like even the Loch Ness Monster thing, that was just one or two pictures, I think.
I mean, it's typically
furs.
known in the horror community, or like most people think that Cannibal Holocaust can be thought of as the first found footage. But you're right, Bigfoot would predate that.
Well, but he's talking about, so like Cannibal Holocaust would be a feature film. What he's talking about isn't even a feature; it's just a quick clip.
Yeah. It's kind of like that. It was the first time, at least that I knew that like something was put out there and not said, oh no, it's fake, or no, it's, like they were just like, no, it really happened. And they never, I mean, I know that later on people came out and said, oh, I was the guy in the suit or whatever. I don't really keep up with that, like the, authenticity or whatever. But at that point, when I saw it, in the early 70s, to me, that was like, okay, that's real footage. They're interviewing the guys who did it, who filmed it. Like, this is real. This is like a documentary. This is like a news program. And I think that's where like the early kind of seeds of Blair Witch were born, And
I was just going to say,
Dan, Dan, the guy I wrote, Dan Myrick, I wrote the movie with, and I came up with the idea with, he felt the same way. Like that Patterson-Gimlin was like the triggering mechanism for a lot of that.
I was thinking as we were talking about all this that I do find it amusing that someone who actually was afraid of Bigfoot in your childhood then was the one that got involved with Blair Witch. So there's definitely some pulling from experience, shall we say?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I knew what, scared me, and, the that kind of footage. And then also just the idea of camping, camping like at night, it's all fun and stuff. And then once you go to sleep, you start hearing things. And so just the fear of the woods,
And I can also relate about, like I don't consider myself a horror fan either. There have been things that I have enjoyed and appreciated throughout the years that have been in the horror genre, but I personally wouldn't consider myself a fan, which is part of the reason that I, Chris and I partner on this, because I bring the psychology side and he's got the horror side much better than I do. I did find some stuff in my adult years that I think has turned me into a particular direction of a certain subgenre, but this call is about you, not me, so we'll put that to the side. You mentioned a bunch of your family came over to watch The Exorcist with you guys. Were other people in your family horror fans, or were they coming over for the documentary part of it?
My dad was the only person that I would say was a movie fan in my family, and like he really loved movies. Like he would take me to, and he didn't speak English, so he would take. There was a theater in the area. I grew up in there, a little bit above DC, in Tacoma Park, and there was a a theater called the Ontario that played like Spanish dubbed movies on the weekends, special showings or whatever. So he would go, whatever the movie was dubbed in Spanish, he would go see it. So we watched a lot of weird movies. That was also kind of, a lot of rated R movies, a lot of movies that probably I shouldn't have seen as a kid. But he just loved going to the movies. Mm-hmm. But he loved movies that he didn't really like horror movies, and he still to this day doesn't like horror movies. He likes more like action movies. Like he loved James Bond. Him and I would go see all the James Bond movies together, and wait for them at when they would show on on the TV. That was a big event, like the James Bond man. He would call it El Hombre Fantástico because he didn't. So he was the Fantastic Man because he was always like getting out of all these crazy situations. But he loved it, and he kind of instilled this the love of action and then also comedy. He loved comedy, like especially slapstick comedy. Like he loved like Airplane and Naked Gun, even though he didn't really quite understand everything that was going on. Him and I used to watch the Benny Hill show together. So, it was that kind of, but he was the only one that really was like a kind of a movie fan in my family, but not a horror fan. No, not at all.
Okay. That's fine. Not every question is going to hit. You never know. That's why you just we gotta go through them.
Sure.
Let's see. Did you participate in Halloween as a kid?
Yeah, I did. It wasn't like as big a deal as it is now, like now it's like this big commercial thing. And I mean, sure, it was commercial back then also, but it was just kind of goofy. And I was always unhappy with my costumes, because like the costumes back then, like were not like, you really didn't really like dress up like Darth Vader. You dressed up in a Darth Vader mask and then an outfit with Darth Vader on the front of it. Like it wasn't like an authentic costume. And the same thing with Evel Knievel and, they just had the costumes were horrible. So I was like longing for like, if I want to dress up like Darth Vader, I want to look like Darth Vader. I don't want to have a picture of Darth Vader on my chest. It's ridiculous.
We were just talking about this the last podcast we did earlier today. It's funny. We got to start a tally of how often those Ben Cooper costumes come up. And I pointed that out. I was like, why do you need a picture on the shirt of the same thing that's the mask? And Steve, of course, explained, well, it's because they know that the masks are so uncomfortable, the kids are going to take them off. So they want to put the product somewhere.
Right.
Yeah, I guess so. But it's still like, like for me as a kid, like if somebody had sold like a true Darth Vader costume or a true like, X-Wing pilot or like Evel Knievel or anything like that, which I was like into at the day, or, that's what I would have loved.
Oh, yeah.
But it was just terrible. Like even like Superman was like basically Superman with a cartoon of Superman on the front on the chest. It's like Superman doesn't have a freaking cartoon of himself. Right. So it was just a frustrating time as a kid.
Did you have any scary dreams when you were a kid?
All the time. Probably the scariest dream I ever had as a kid. Well, I still remember one dream where I had been abducted. Again, my mom had been like planting these things in my head.
Right.
It was basically I was in the back area, the back parking lot of my apartment complex, and this van pulled up, and the door slid open, and somebody grabbed me, and it's all I remember of the dream. But it was like so, just really horrifying, and I still remember it to this day. And then in my teenage years, I had a dream about like what I understood to be Satan. Like Satan was in my room. And it's, usually it was just basically like this dark shadow. I remember having the dream and then waking up and not being able to move for like an hour, just pure, like I couldn't move my body. I mean, I could, but I was just like, and then I finally got enough, just got tired of laying there, and I just got up and ran to my mom's room, and, it was middle of the night. So those, but I would dream all the time of, Bigfoot dreams, and sometimes, like a UFO dream, and just kind of certain things like that of like people talking to me that, I'd seen Bigfoot the night before. And so, yeah, it was, as a kid, I think, as a kid, I had a lot of, kind of bad dreams.
Was there ever a time when you were actually terrified of something as a child in real life?
No. I mean, we lived in a neighborhood that was not a great neighborhood. Like we had a lot of, police would come and fire trucks, and there was just a lot of activity in my neighborhood. But I never saw like any kind of shooting or anybody. I saw the aftermath of somebody get stabbed. Like we saw the blood trail of somebody who got stabbed the night before. But no, I was fairly lucky.
Let me flip the question, ask it a different way. Was there a time in your childhood when you felt completely calm or safe or at bliss?
I guess Christmas was always a good time. My mom and dad grew up really poor, and I think like a lot of immigrants or a lot of people who grew up poor, they, when they have an opportunity to give their kids something, they go crazy and they probably give them too much.
Yeah.
So I would get so much stuff for Christmas. I mean, compared to my friends and stuff, I would just get twice the amount of stuff. So Christmas, like most kids, I mean, going to sleep Christmas night, there's this magic. And my birthday is 5 days before Christmas. So like by the time, the end of around this time, like the end of October, early November, I started counting down the days until my birthday and Christmas, because I knew that I was getting stuff.
Oh, so you did get separates? Because I know a lot of parents do the whole like, oh, your birthday is so close to Christmas.
That's the thing. I would get separates. I mean, my mom was very cool about that. I never had, I mean, sometimes, people would get me something and it was like, for both Christmas and birthday. But my parents were definitely cool about, separating out the gifts and making sure you got, 2 different gifts.
That is good.
But my parents, for being, pretty undereducated, coming from, very poor conditions in Cuba and fleeing Cuba, like basically not escaping, but like just kind of leaving everything behind, leaving with nothing. Mm-hmm. My parents somehow figured it out and were able to kind of give us a pretty stable, me and my 2 sisters, a pretty stable childhood.
That's good.
Yeah, it is good.
Say, not everybody gets that.
No, so absolutely.
Being able to have it. Mm-hmm. That is not uncommon, like you say, for parents to want their kids to have, better than they had.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving into teenage years, you mentioned you had that dream about Satan and being in your room. You also mentioned that you weren't exactly a huge horror fan until your later years, but was there anything that stood out to you in your teen years that you remember being impactful from the horror genre?
Again, Friday the 13th Part 3, which was, again, like the only Friday the 13th movie that I went to the theater with. And I went because my cousins were going and I was like, all right, I'll go with you guys. But that was not the kind of movie that I watched as growing up. Though I watched pretty much everything else. For me, the kind of the staying away from horror was the problem with me, man, is that I would like especially the Bigfoot stuff. I would like get it would basically ruin me for months at a time. Like I would watch. Like I remember I watched after The Exorcist. I was just like scared. I was in this perpetual state of fear for a while. And the same thing when I watched, I don't know what Bigfoot thing I watched, or whether it was the In Search of episode, because there was a lot of Bigfoot kind of documentaries and like specials when I was growing up, because, he was like a hot creature. So there was a lot of stuff. There's stuff, little documentaries about Bigfoot in Maryland where I grew up, and that really scared the crap out of me. So, but these things would like kind of leave their mark for like long periods of time. And I remember being scared to wash my face in the shower because I had to close my eyes, because of the soap. And I remember like getting to the point where like, all right, I got to wash my face or my hair or whatever. And then just like barely keeping my eyes closed and like for a couple of seconds and then opening them again, because I thought that we had in the shower in our apartment, we had like a little window, and it was really high. I mean, it was like probably 12 feet up off the ground. So it wasn't like anybody was going to look through, but I was sure that one day I was going to come out of my, washing my hair or washing my face, open my eyes and Bigfoot was going to be there sitting, staring at me, or like an alien, like a gray or something was going to be there. So these things like really, really, affected me. So I just basically shied away mostly from horror films. And again, like until I got into college and I met this guy named Neil Fredericks, who was, he ended up being my DP for a long time. And then he's sadly passed away, like 15 years ago, like a while ago. But he was a really big horror guy. And he was the first kind of horror geek that I met. And he introduced me to a lot of the classic kind of, horror movies and a lot of the stuff that was popular. Like when we were in college, like Trauma was like huge, Toxic Avenger, even though, it's not really horror, but, he introduced me to like the Full Moon movies and Puppet Master and the Hellraiser. And he I watched a lot of movies through him. And it was good that I had, it was cool that I had a companion. I guess it was easier to watch movies with somebody else than by myself. So, but again, I just didn't, I don't know if I had an attitude towards horror. And I think it was because I just was so afraid of it. It wasn't fun for me to watch horror movies that were effective. And the violence really, like, I don't like violent movies, especially when like people are like the characters are having fun with violence. Like it just doesn't, it just bugs the hell out of me. It's just like I just shy away from that kind of stuff. So that's a lot of the movies kind of cross that line for me, and I just don't enjoy them once they do that. So anyway,
no, I'm with you. I refuse to watch the Saw movies or Hostel. Like I just don't need to put that in my brain or. And now I know that there are people who like that, but I don't need it.
Yeah. No, it's yeah. And again, it's like that. It's just taste. Some people love that stuff. You're right. But I just kind of don't appreciate it.
So teenager, Halloween as a teenager, did you participate?
Not as much. I don't remember. Again, like the people that I hung out with in high school were not like big horror guys, and I don't think we ever went out on Halloween. I mean, maybe Halloween just to like be hoodlums and like steal pumpkins and stuff. I mean, I remember doing that, just kind of being idiots like that. But as far as like the night, I think the last time I went trick-or-treating, I went with a friend, and he pretended to be blind and to get more candy. And at that point, after that night, I was like, I think I'm done with trick or treating.
Right? Like it wasn't like turned off from trick or treating because you got too old. You're just like, I don't like people taking advantage of this.
I was just like, this is it. I mean, I'm done with this. It's too much.
What are we doing here?
Exactly.
If I want candy, I'll just go, get a bag of it. It's like, and that also just laziness also, but no, I don't remember. I didn't like Halloween until like I had kids and my wife. Like I never, I mean, we're from Cuba, man. Like, we don't do Halloween. You don't do Halloween in Cuba. Like, at least we, when my parents were kids. So like the first time I, carved the jack-o'-lantern was with my wife. So I had there's none of that Halloween tradition or like decorating the house. Because you have to remember that like Halloween to like the super Christians is a totally pagan and like,
right.
It is, yeah.
It's a dangerous, holiday.
If anything, you have All Hallows Eve, and that's just more revering. Yeah,
there weren't any Halloween decorations in my house, and my mom, she let me dress up as, Evel Knievel, and I don't know who else I dressed up as, like maybe Darth Vader. I had one year, but I don't think she would have gone. I don't think she would have been too happy if I would have been like, I want to dress like a werewolf or like something something horrific like that, a zombie or something. I think she would have probably talked me out of that. or not buy me the costume.
Right. Sometimes the Halloween questions can be interesting to hear what people have to say because Well, even in America, I mean, there are certain people who were raised in certain religions, for example, that don't refuse to celebrate holidays. So it's always interesting to hear what people's individuals' experiences were.
Mhm.
Did you ever have a time in your teenage years where you were actually terrified of something in real life?
My friend Lonnie had this pickup truck, and we, back in the day, of course, everybody would sit in the back of the bed, and we would go to these fields and just do donuts and shit, basic bullshit, just bored teenagers, without girlfriends. That's important too. And we went to this field. It was like an air park where, like, the county had like set up so that you could fly your toy planes. It was just like, it was like a little park, but it had like really high grass. And I remember Lonnie in the middle of night, we'd like go in there. You're not supposed to be in there at night anyway, but we'd go in this field, and you couldn't see what was in front of the car. You know what I mean? Like that kind of situation where like the grass is so high that the headlights are just hitting, and you're just kind of making your way through this field. And he was like flying, and then we're all in the back and jumping around. And I don't know whose idea it was to just say, like, just stops. Let's see where we are, So he stops, and we all get out of the truck, and we walk to the, around, and we walk to the front of the thing, and literally like maybe 10 feet in front of the truck was like this 30-foot drop off. So we would have all died. Like I would have been thrown. I was in the back of the truck, and Alani and the guys inside would have been killed too. I mean, that car would have head right into the dirt at 50 miles an hour or whatever. Like it would have.
Right.
So we all just stood there staring down death. Like we were literally like, 10 feet away from that pickup truck going over the edge of that hill and like and just destroying our lives. Like if not death, it would have been bad.
Mm-hmm.
That really kind of, calmed us down, and was like, we should go home. We should just go home. You learn things, man. And I think at that point, from that point on, we were more careful, we were like, we got, so it was at least a lesson for us. It's not like we went out and started doing the same thing. Like definitely a lesson, but I just remember like riding home and just being like, holy, like just going over the possibilities of how that night could have ended,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really messes with you when you have like a near-death experience like that. Just the after effects, because obviously you don't think about it during, because everything happens too fast. But
yes.
Afterwards you're like, I could have died.
Yeah, but I just remember like looking over and just be just terrified, like just imagining in my mind's eye, like what would I have done? I would have flown out of that, and I probably wouldn't have gotten hit by the truck, but it would have been like jumping off a 30-foot cliff at like 40 miles an hour. Like you would have like almost like a mini Thelma and Louise. I mean, that would have been not good. So I think that that experience, I just remember just everybody looking over the edge and just being quiet for like 10 seconds. Like, holy shit, So yeah, man, it's crazy.
It's kind of survivorship bias thing here, kind of saying it jokingly of you either learn or you don't, because there are a lot of people who don't survive it. They either, they're in a position where either they didn't stop or they didn't stop soon enough.
Yeah.
And then they don't make it. And the ones that get to learn those lessons and or survive, they're the ones that get to keep on living and telling other people,
Yeah. And luckily we learned, because like there's a lot of other things that we didn't really learn in high school. But we definitely, I think after that, it was very, we kind of, we tapered down that kind of activity. So we were still knuckleheads, but we just realized like, shit, man, we almost died last weekend. Like, maybe we should take it easy.
Let's calm down for a little bit.
Like a week.
Yeah. In your teens, was there ever a time in your teens when you felt completely calm or safe or bliss?
I was always interested in films. My dad, like instilled this love of cinema, not in a like, it's not like he was very sophisticated, but he loved movies, and I loved movies with him. Like I learned to love movies with him. And But and I watched Star Wars. I love Star Wars. I read everything about like making of Star Wars, the special effects. Any movie that came out, science fiction movie after that, I would watch. Like and it was the first movie that made me interested in how they made movies. So it made me aware that there was a writer and there's directors and there's cinematographers. Even though I didn't quite understand everything, but it made me aware, like, oh, this is how you do it. You have lights, and you have a camera, you build a set, you hang the ships, green screen, you learn all those things. And I was just fascinated by it. And then in 11th grade, they offered a TV production class in my high school. As kind of like I got my friend Rick Marino. I'm like, hey, let's take this class, man. It looks like fun. Maybe make some videos or whatever. So the moment of bliss for me was like when, on the first day of that class, I remember where I was sitting. I remember like the teacher, Mr. Barron, he wasn't even a TV production teacher. He had worked at a TV station for a little while in his youth, and they made him the TV production teacher. And he knew, the basics.
He's qualified.
We had we had a little TV studio in our high school, like, because the school had just been remodeled, and we were like, it was like the only TV studio in the high school in the county, which was like super lucky for me. You know what I'm saying? That I was able to start in high school. So I remember like the first day there, Mr. Barron comes out and tells his story, tells us like, this isn't just like making goofy movies and, making, goofing around. There's, you can have a career in this. Like there's not just Steven Spielberg and George Lucas aren't the only people that work in films. Like there's also, there's hundreds and thousands, people that have to like work on sets to, in every aspect, of production. So it's not just like this kind of pie in the sky thing. There's actually a career here, right. It's a career path. And from that moment, the clarity of like where I was heading in my life, all of a sudden I knew where I was going. Like I knew that I was going to be a filmmaker, and I knew that I was going to, I was ready for the struggle, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. So that moment of bliss, other than like when my kids were born, that's very few times that I've felt that. Even with all the success of Blair Witch and stuff, like there was always this level of like nervousness to it, like this kind of like, we're like on this grand stage, and I've always felt uncomfortable when like put on in the spotlight. But that moment was like a moment where I was like, at my young, I was probably 17
because you hadn't been put in a spotlight yet.
Yeah, exactly.
You were enjoying all the hope.
Yeah, I finally got my direction, man. And I feel so lucky for that, because, most people don't have that, clarity of like what they want to do for the rest of their lives.
Let's jump down to adult years then. So you mentioned turning into a bit of a horror fan after Blair Witch. What would you say if you were to pick like the top 3 influential things that you could think of in the horror genre? What would be the first things that come to mind for you in your adult years?
As far as films are concerned?
Or books, movies?
Well, I mean, the book Communion, for some reason, and now I'm like looking back, I'm like, because this is the first time I've actually thought about it, but I did go through a phase where I was reading horror novels and scaring the bejesus out of myself.
Okay.
I remember like I would only read because this was like the days when you were like literally we had mattresses on the floor. That was our room, and we were I was sharing a little house with 3 other guys, and I shared a house actually with Neil, the guy I mentioned before. He went to school. He didn't go to school with me, but he was my roommate during school when I went to film school. And I remember I would only read when he was in the room, because I could not. I mean, and Communion to me, Amityville Horror scared the crap out of me, but Communion really, really impacted me. And again, like I gravitated toward these stories that had like some kind of validity. You know what I'm saying? Like Amityville Horror was supposed to be a true story, and Communion was supposed to be a true story. You know what I mean? Even like, Whitley Strieber to this day says that actually happened to him. Like that was a real, that was somebody being abducted by aliens. You know what I'm saying? That was a real, to me, it was like a true story, whether you believe it or not, it's irrelevant, but that really just scared me and like kind of influenced me again, like kind of brought fear back into it kind of brought that fear back into my life, like that I hadn't let in for a long time. But influential movies for me, horror movies, I mean, Jaws, is like the monster, like a perfect monster movie,
Mm-hmm.
Evil Dead 2.
Yep. Another good one.
Just like I'd never seen that style, and I still love it. It's still my favorite form of horror, like the kind of comedic, over the top. I just did a short film that kind of is kind of Evil Dead-ish a little bit. It's horror comedy, and I just love that that subgenre of horror.
Oh yeah.
I guess horror movies from that era, and then the Thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just I loved John Carpenter as a kid. Like I loved, though I shied away from his horror movies. I really did. Like I loved Escape from New York. I loved, Christine. I loved even, because it wasn't like super scary. You know what I mean? It was more like just such a cool film. I remember watching that in the theater like 3 or 4 times. And Escape from New York, of course, was like my all-time favorite, I think, John Carpenter movie as a kid. Like just, I remember when it came out on video, I was like, oh, I can watch it at home, because I mean, for most of my childhood, you couldn't see movies unless you went to the theater or they showed them when they showed them on TV. So, or if you were lucky to have, a friend with HBO, you could watch movies on HBO or whatever. But, there was no videos, no home video. If you missed a movie at the theater, you were kind of, sometimes you would never see it again. That's it. That's your chance to see it. I think those films, and then it's not really a horror movie, but I loved Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it had some horrific. I guess you could categorize it as a horror movie, but
it was a rom horror.
Yeah,
romantic horror,
Yeah, romantic. Yeah, for sure. And that's that's again like what I love about horror, man, is that there's so many subgenres in horror. Like. Especially, and so it's cool to be stuck in horror because you're like, well, there's so many different kinds of movies I can make within the horror, genre that you never get bored. Even if you had to stay in the horror genre, for the rest of my career, you just feel like I would never get bored. There's always new things to do.
True. Going back to Coppola's Dracula for a moment, you said that you really like that, but didn't expand on that too much. What did you like about that one?
Gary Oldman, of course.
Yes.
Just the production design, the effects, like just the way that they try to do everything in camera. It just felt like the different time periods, just the costuming, the score is one of my favorites.
Some more from an auteur perspective.
Yeah, from because I watched it once. I was like, I guess when did Bram Stoker? When did that come out? In the 90s?
I want to say 90s. Yeah.
So I was already in film school, so I was already kind of in that mode, and it was just one of these things where you're like, that's a true master. Like there's very few films where you like, just blow you away in that way, where like you're creatively writing, cinematography, acting, the, costume design, the music, the sound design, like everything came together in such a unique way. You know what I'm saying? It was like, it felt like it was a new movie, but it felt like an old movie. And that's what I really appreciated about it.
Mm-hmm.
They went all in on all levels.
Yeah, man. And that's it was one of those things where like, I was obviously a fan of Francis Ford Coppola, but like, you didn't expect that movie from him,
No, especially not with his other works, but it's still great.
Oh, it's great. I mean, and then again, Gary Oldman is great in everything, but
everything.
Just, I don't know how he did that movie, like what he does, anyway. But yeah, that movie, I love that movie, but I mean, and now it's like, there's, I feel like finally now horror is getting like the respect it deserves. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Like I feel that there's going to be
a resurgence.
Yeah, there's already a we're in
the middle of a resurgence.
Yeah, we're in the middle of it.
Yes.
Like, and also like I think, and the whole idea of like resurgence of horror, like horror has always been popular. You know what I mean? Like you had to kind of dig down and with a segment of like the true horror fans, we've always been.
Sorry, I meant more like mainstream.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
It's making and it comes back every few years and kind of breaks through into the mainstream. But I think there's just better and better horror films being made now than ever. I think hopefully it'll lead to more respect for the people, because it's not beneath any other genre.
No.
Maybe at one time it was, but not anymore. You know what I'm saying? So
right. Yeah, I think the biggest reason that it's even seen that way is because of misunderstanding from the mainstream world about horror fans, which is part of the reason that we're doing this podcast, is to to dig into the reasons why horror fans love horror, to be able to say these aren't crazy people. There's reasons they like this stuff. I think the biggest disservice is that the assumption that all horror fans are latent psychopaths, that which is not true. And that's not to say that there aren't psychopaths who are fans of horror, because I'm sure there are, but that's not the case for all of them. And having a moment to step back and really take a good look at things and understand what's going on is, I think, valuable, not only to the horror community, but to the rest of the world as well.
I mean, I think that like it definitely is like a, there's like a, deeper psychological reason why people like horror movies, or certain people like horror movies, but also just humans in general, why roller coasters are popular and why haunted houses are popular, and movies, horror movies that are basically about human suffering and humans going through horrible things. There's it's the same reason why, like, you stop at an accident, to gawk at an accident, like there is, and, or boxing and the gladiators, like there is a certain part of humanity, of our human psyche that likes to see that. I don't know if likes is the correct word, but is attracted to,
is drawn to,
is drawn to violence and drawn to other people's plights.
I think the sort of analogy that I'm coming to is that there seemed to be, and not only in horror, but across the board for humanity, there seems to be like three sort of tiers of enjoyment. The first tier is, I kind of like this, but it's take it or leave it, but it's all right. And then the second tier is the excitement, like you're talking about. There are people who like to go on roller coaster rides, and some people like, in this case, horror or sports or whatever. There's the people who get excited of, yeah, this is awesome. And then the third tier is the one that makes you go, okay, you're a little weird. Like you're enjoying this a little too much, like almost, I don't want to say sexual pleasure, but bordering on that kind of thing. And I think that, like I say, this is true for all of humanity, and it's just a matter of what it is that what topic are we talking about? That there are certain people who get the first or second tiers of enjoyment out of a lot of different things, and that I think the problem is that there are people who, particularly with the horror genre, seem to miscategorize a lot of the people who are in the first and second categories, and thinking that they're in the third one when that's not necessarily the case.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and also, the horror community is like none other on the planet, other than maybe, I guess Star Trek has a certain kind of a community, around it, but like horror in general, like, not to generalize, but I mean, there are a lot of, I mean, I consider myself a geek and I consider myself as weird as they come, but there are a lot of weird people that I meet, in horror festivals, especially. And, just kind of that, and a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of socially awkward people. And, and I feel
I was just going to say, it depends on what you mean by weird.
Yeah. Like
awkward, that's not the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Like a lot of, socially awkward people who, like, you can tell, who don't have like a normal life. A lot of them don't have mates and, whatever. I'm not going to get into that, but there is a community in the horror world that, is just, I feel like that's the biggest draw to, like, people who, like, it's like you're just loving something that other people love, and you're not a weirdo when you go to, I just went to Fantastic Fest, and it's all a bunch of weirdos, but we're all accepting of each other, and we all love kind of doing this thing. You know what I'm saying?
There's a phrase in common to, science that, correlation is not causation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you just pointed out about the awkwardness part of it is, again, going back to the mainstream, I think a lot of people in the mainstream see that, yes, there are these awkward people that you're talking about, and also that third tier of pleasure. And I think they're correlating the two and thinking, understand what I'm saying? Like they're mixing all this stuff together.
Yes.
And our point is to step back and go, okay, well, wait a minute, let's talk about this. Cause we got that, we've got this, but that doesn't mean that it's across the board. And it's not even necessarily those two things combined.
Exactly. Yeah, but because when I look at horror fans, I mostly see like just a really tight community of people sharing things that they love, and I may not love the same things that they love.
Yeah, but they don't fault you for that. You're not like a pariah because you don't like this genre.
Usually, yeah. Usually, you get everybody's cool with everything. I mean, obviously, you get the haters online and everything that hate everything, but generally speaking, there is this sense of like, we're all here to enjoy ourselves and not judge each other and just be
right. But the point is that you could make these same exact conversations about like car clubs, but the mainstream world doesn't look at people who are members of car clubs like the same way that they do people who are fans of horror for some reason.
Absolutely, and I mean, and I think that again, it goes back to like, why some people don't practice Halloween, and there is this level of like, like my I just did a movie. We did an anthology called Satanic Hispanics that premiered at Fantastic Fest.
I like that.
Yeah, and it was a good. They had a good turnout, and we had good reviews, and it's a fun movie, and it's not going to change anybody's life, but it's a fun anthology.
Mm-hmm.
But there's like I have an aunt in Miami, and she's really Christian, like she's very into it. And I knew it was going to cause trouble because she's on Facebook, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And she couldn't help but say, hey, what's going on? And why, you know what I'm saying? So like, and I think that a lot of people in that position completely shy away from horror because there is this religious kind of moral thing where you're like, oh, you're serving Satan. Mm-hmm. Like Satan is involved in horror.
I'm sure that doesn't help.
No, it doesn't help. That doesn't help. So I think there's a lot of that also where people are just do not understand that Satan is not involved in making movies usually.
As far as we know.
Yeah.
Let's wrap up a couple of the adult section questions here before we get to some of the other wrap up questions. Any really scary dreams as an adult?
The scary dreams that I have as an adult is like, somebody's dead, but it's not really fear anymore. It's more stress. Like the flight is leaving in like 3 hours and I haven't even packed, and I don't even know where the airport is. And it's all, and then those dreams are layered with other like psychological baggage. Like there's always like an element of Star Wars collecting. I have this huge Star Wars collection.
I will say, full disclosure, I took a peek at your Facebook profile before the show, and that is an impressive collection, sir.
Yeah, no, and honestly, like I don't really show it off too much because I'm afraid that somebody's going to rob me,
Yeah.
But it's like it's gotten to the point now where like it's become sort of a liability to me. Like I've stopped buying, so much Star Wars stuff, and I'm like trying to get rid of some of it now. Mm-hmm. So in my dream, there's always this level of like, I'm packing, and then I discover that there's a closet full of Star Wars toys that I bought while I was there, and I'm like, oh my god, what am I going to do with these? I got to find a box, and so there's always like this, so that's I'm lucky because that's kind of where I don't have like super terrifying dreams anymore.
Yeah, the adult scary dreams are more like the occupational stress thing. Like, oh my god, did I leave the stove on? Did I forget this? Did I not show up in time for this? Yeah.
Has anything actually terrified you in real life as an adult?
When I was editing Blair Witch, that kind of when I had to fly out of the editing room. And then the other time I felt that this Blair Witch related was we were at the house that we shot the last scene in. This is before we were shooting, but it was like around the same time because I remember a lot of people being there and we were just there kind of scouting. And I was left alone in that basement by myself and I didn't realize it. I was like kind of just, looking around and looking at the walls and it was dark. It was getting dark. So everybody was leaving. And all of a sudden I realized that I was alone in the house.
You're like, no, wait, guys.
Like there's nobody. I mean, you always heard people upstairs or whatever. And I'm like, holy shit, I'm alone. And it was kind of tricky getting out of that house before we like worked on it a little bit before the production, because the stairs up to the first floor were like, there was no stairs. It was all kind of tattered. And then there was a hole leading into the basement, into the cellar, where I guess the cellar door had been at one time, but it was just, you had to like climb over bricks and it was just really not a great place to be stuck in. And I remember just flying out of there and I'm like, wait up for me. Like, everybody was like down in the woods already. Mm-hmm. And then the only other time I've been truly terrified is like when my second kid, my son was born, my wife went in for an emergency C-section. That was really scary because I thought just the way that the doctors were acting and the way that the nurses were like, it was just like a scene from ER. Like, all right, we got to move her to the operating room like immediately. Like it was like, and it was kind of one of those like, well, no, you stay behind. We can't let you in. This is an emergency situation. So like for about, I don't know, like 10 or 15 minutes there, I walked around the hospital thinking that I was going to, lose my wife and my kid. And then I already had, a daughter, like a little 3-year-old, 4-year-old daughter. So I was like, literally like thinking of like, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to deal with this?
Not only will you be losing your child, but your daughter will be losing a mother. That's some heavy shit to deal with.
Yeah. So like, that was the most terrifying time of my adult life for sure.
Yeah.
With good reason. Don't really have any comments on that because it is so understandable. Some of the wrap up questions here. Now, these next two questions are looking back over your entire life, not just any one section, and they're not just about horror. So, but I'm going to give you the two questions at the same time because it could be the same answer for both, or it could be two different answers. But if you were forced to pick one favorite movie, what would it be, and what movie have you watched more times than any other?
There's movies, there's a lot of movies that I really love, but I feel like, Star Wars, the first one, A New Hope, was, definitely the most influential thing that ever happened in my life, I feel. And not only my life, but my partner Greg's life and like half the other filmmakers that I know, it would completely reset everything. You know what I mean? So, and for me, it's like, it's a reason that I'm a filmmaker. And it's the reason why I have this life. Like I owe everything to, and also just like, the motivation, like, and the, like, the inspiration of Star Wars, still to this day is like, there's things that I think about and, like the original script and, just the concepts. Like the other day I was thinking about like, as I was going to sleep, like just why are X-Wing fighters so damn cool?
It's groundbreaking.
It was revolutionary. It was like almost like it was like the iPhone. You know what I'm saying?
Star Wars, the iPhone of films. I like it.
Yeah, it was it just, and everything changed after that, man. You know what I mean? And not only like in the business, but like, for kids like me who are suddenly like wanting to be filmmakers or at least getting interested in it. So I think that one has to be the one that is the most influential to me. And then the movie that I've seen the most is either Grease or Airplane. Okay. Because we had, when VHS came out in Betamax, it was really expensive. Like those VCRs were like $2,000 when they first came out. And then this back in the 80s money. The more affordable way to watch movies was this thing called video discs. And it was basically like a record, but the machine was $300. So my dad could afford it. And again, this was all my dad wanting to watch movies at home. And we basically you could rent the movies, but we just, the movies were like $20. So pretty affordable. Yeah. So we just bought, Star Wars wasn't available. I obviously would have bought it, but, we bought, Airplane and Grease and Tron and all these movies that were available on video disc. And by far, Airplane and Grease, there was probably a summer there where we watched Grease every single day.
Nice.
And then Airplane was my dad's favorite, so we would watch it repeatedly. But I guess I'd have to be those two films, man.
Mm. I can understand how Airplane can underscore your love of comedy and humor.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What does Grease inform in your life?
Grease was it was just a fun movie, man. I mean, first of all, my older sister loved it. Mm. And, Olivia Newton-John was so freaking hot. The music was fun. My sister had the soundtrack. I mean, it was you had to kind of be had to be around when how huge Grease was as a movie. And then, John Travolta as a star and all the songs and it was just you would sing the songs. We still sing the songs. It's this.
To use the iPhone analogy for Star Wars, I would say Grease was the Lion King of its time.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. People love that movie. There's a reason for that. I mean, it was, it was this, musicals weren't really a thing.
I was just about to say, Grease was a big thing, and there were musicals before Grease, but yeah, it really did bring musicals to the forefront of everything because everyone loved it.
Grease was, and I've never thought of it this way, but Grease really was, it's a series of music videos of these songs that, we loved as kids and we still love. Some of those songs are freaking great. And I think it was just fun to see people performing. It was fun to see a little movie based on a song. And I think once, shortly thereafter, MTV premiered. And I think that was the beauty of MTV and the music videos was oh, it's fucking cool, man. This is cool. I've never seen, Bruce Springsteen sing his song like this or act whatever. You know what I'm saying? It was these, or Michael Jackson, just, it was just so much, that was part of the excitement. I think Grease paved the way because in theory, there are these little music videos in the movie. I mean, the musical numbers, are little music videos,
Yeah.
And the reason that I brought up Lion King is because not only of that, but it's also the cross-cultural appeal in that, you would have, for example, with the Lion King, you would have people who were not fans of Disney musicals singing, Can You Feel the Love Tonight, that normally would not have any interest in that song whatsoever. And it's kind of the same thing with Grease, as there were people who were enjoying that stuff who were not fans of musicals.
Exactly. Yeah. And I even as a kid, I loved West Side Story, and it's one of my favorite movies as well. So there were, you're right, there were musicals, but that that was just kind of. I mean, I like all kinds. I think that mostly for me, I feel like the supernatural is more fun. Mm-hmm. It's more unpredictable, even though humans are really unpredictable, and have these serial killer movies that are just a deranged mind is also unpredictable, and there's something really scary about that. But I like the idea of I like horror movies that give me enough of an explanation, but I also like the idea of no, man, it's just this kind of crazy supernatural stuff is sometimes happens at random, and there's no human explanation for what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like there's that a dichotomy or duality, if you will, of just people constantly looking for the answer, but also being entertained by the lack of an answer. So you kind of in this perpetual motion machine of entertainment and wanting.
Yeah, and the mystery, and also again, what Blair Witch proved, what the audience can come up with in their head, visually, or just motivationally, like why is this demon or whatever doing this,
Mhm.
is much scarier than anything else,
Oh,
than
yeah.
anything we could show you. And I think, that's why I think, horror novels are so, effective, is that you're basically working in your own brain.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
so when they describe a creature and it's creepy, you're going to think of a creepy thing in your mind, that might be creepy to you, but might not be creepy to somebody else. So the
Right.
idea of like keeping it hidden is just a good tool. It's just a good tool to kind of keep the audience engaged and, work their imaginations to your advantage.
Mm-hmm.
So this conversation has kind of already answered some of the questions that normally would come after this, but to summarize, the two things that I'm hearing coming up multiple times in our call here tonight is that two parallel trails of topics. One is abduction and abandonment fears,
Mhm.
which, like you say, mentioned probably started with your mom's fears, but also has come up in things like your own, running from fear at different points in your life, also in the basement alone. Your emergency C-section was also related to potential abandonment. And then the other parallel part of this is the supernatural, and which has come up a number of different times in not only The Exorcist, but potentially you could also describe this as part of the Bigfoot, and some of the other topics that we've talked about. The Confession, I think, was that the name of the book?
The communion.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the follow-up question there would be, do you have any idea why it is that those things are important to you? And I think that's where the conversation already answered. You've got your background from your mom's family and that kind of thing for the abduction and abandonment. And then the interest in the supernatural is that it relates to these unanswered questions that are unanswered. And then you could even maybe narrow that down a little bit more to say that these two parallel tracks kind of refer to what I would call concrete fears and undefined fears, because the abduction and abandonment stuff, there is some part of that that's undefined, because the part that's undefined is, well, what would happen afterwards? But the concrete part of it is, if you're abducted or you're abandoned,
Then you're not safe.
Exactly what is it you're afraid of.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, but you know exactly why you're not safe.
Okay.
Whereas the supernatural is much more undefined in that respect.
True.
So before I ask the next question, I would say, as far as that being a summary, do you think that's accurate, or do you think that there's maybe a better description of maybe common themes with your relationship to horror?
No, man. I think you've nailed it. I was taught early in my life to believe it, to believe in the supernatural.
Mhm.
And then even and as I grew up, I kind of shied away from religion, which is, shying away from the supernatural, because, religion is supernatural,
Mhm.
but there's this inherent curiosity about the fact that I am a horror filmmaker. Is like, it's, pushed me toward examining that. And obviously, when you write and when you make films and when you make art, you are examining yourself as well. You're like showing, that's why it's so painful sometimes, like creating art is so painful, is because you are like discovering things about yourself and a lot of things that, are not good. Sometimes you find things that you don't like about yourself. So I think that's accurate, and definitely the abandonment and just being like the whole kind of, being taken away from my parents is that's very part of my foundation, for sure, of my fears. Yes.
Actually, before I ask the next question, I want to take this moment, because some of the things that we were talking about here about spirituality and the purpose of religion, I think this is a great place for me to drop a quick comment about, there's this sort of dichotomy, this fight that happens a lot of times within the religious community, that they believe that science is trying to destroy religion, or that, once science explains everything, then there won't be any room for God.
Mhm.
And I've always had this counter argument that I never really get to put out there, which is that God is supposed to be infinite, which means that the unknown is always going to be infinite. And if science explains the part that's known, well, that's finite by definition, because you know what you know. And so there are boundaries to that. Well, if the unknown and God are always going to be infinite, then science can never get rid of God, because there's always going to be something else left over. And if faith is the part that's to be used for the part that's unknown, it's okay, science for what we know and faith for what we don't, then science will never be able to get rid of faith, because there's always going to be something out there that requires it.
Yeah.
But that's a tangent.
Yeah.
All right. So last question here. Why horror? Because the things that we just talked about, these abduction and abandonment and the supernatural and the unanswered questions, are there no other genres that can address these things for you as well as horror can? Or is there something special about this genre that gives you something?
The effective thing about horror is that there's always deeper meaning. At least the good horror movies, there's even the bad horror movies, there's always some kind of psychological or some kind of social thing that's being like pushed to the boundaries, that people shy away from. You know what I mean? Like if you have I did this movie called Altered, and I don't know if you guys watched it, but it's basically these men who were abducted as teenagers by aliens, and then they were all let out, but they were all scarred in many different ways by this, event. And then, we pick them up, I think it was 10 years later or whatever, and they are actively trying to hunt down one of the beings that abducted them, because they know where they land, they know where they hunt. So they capture this creature, and it deals with basically, molestation, like somebody like a priest or somebody in school or somebody, in your family had done these terrible things to you as a kid, and like that traumatized you. And then 10 years later, you're able to have this person, tied up in a table in your room. You know what I mean? Like, what would you do? Like what? So, in the very general sense, the obvious sense, it's a movie about abduction, about alien abduction. It has nothing to do with, child molestation or abandonment or anything like that. But the guys are going through the exact same thing that people go through that go through this kind of trauma. And I think that's what the best thing that horror does, is that the good horror is that it does, let you talk about things that in a drama would be like, oh, this movie is about these, 5 guys who were, sexually assaulted as teenagers, and now they're getting revenge. Like, that's a different movie than, oh, these guys abduct an alien and all kinds of crazy shit happens. You know what I'm saying? So like, it can, there's certain people are not going to see that first movie, you know what I'm saying? But other people, maybe more people, will see the second movie. So, you kind of disguise things, and you can kind of, and so like there's this really heavy trauma that you're dealing with in most horror movies. You know what I mean? It's not just like something simple. They're like little psychological exercises. You know what I mean, for people, and I think that's what is why people kind of gravitate. A lot of people gravitate toward horror movies, is for that reason, just to kind of work through some things.
Right. Like it sounds like that's the point you're trying to make here, is like, yeah, you can get that from all other types of genres of films and stuff, but horror almost, not unlike a shisty parent that sneaks vegetables into their children's spaghetti. You sneak the message into this horror by, having a cover idea of alien abduction, but then underlying that, it's also a lesson about things like trauma from molestation.
Yes, exactly. And that's why I do feel that like movies and media, are influential. I mean, of course. And I'm not saying that, just because you see a movie about, torturing somebody, you're going to go out and torture somebody. But that's kind of where, like, why I, shy away from that kind of stuff, even watching it. I just don't think that there's any lessons to be learned about seeing somebody going, being tortured. You know what I'm saying? Like just violence for the sake of violence, random violence. Like I think that, and I'm not sure how many lessons there are to be learned with that. So for me, it's just like, it's not only unpleasant, but I just don't think it's very useful.
Well, other than, torture porn and random violence, the thing that I think is interesting is that, browsing the horror communities online and things like that and seeing so many people asking for horror recommendations, and they're like, well, I like this and I like this and I like this. What else would I like? And to me, I always kind of chuckle to myself because I think that's the wrong question to ask. I think the question to ask is, what are you afraid of?
Mm-hmm.
Because that might be a better key into understanding what movies you might enjoy.
Yeah, that's true.
But to tie it back to something you said earlier about rom-coms, how rom-coms even have a certain level of tension and release, the answer, I think, to the question of why horror, for you at least, is because it's a question of how deep do you want to take it?
Yeah.
The fear, I mean.
Yeah. But and also for me, horror has it literally was my first hit film was a horror movie. So
that too.
That's kind of where I'm at. You know what I'm saying?
A little bit of bias.
Yeah. There was a certain point in my career, when I went to film school, that I really got into like Spike Lee and like John Sayles, like more kind of
social,
socially conscious kind of. I love Do the Right Thing, pushing those kinds of buttons as well. But I love the idea that I can still do that in a like you were saying, I can still sneak in the vegetables in horror movies. And I think that you reach a wider audience, and it's also probably more effective than like, the kind of the obvious, like, this is good, this is bad. You know what I'm saying? Like the kind of the obvious showing of, dramas that deal with certain topics, like that, important topics, social, important topics. I think that there's, like, I never imagined that I would be a horror filmmaker when I was like, going to film school and stuff. But I do feel very fortunate that I ended up in this space.
So, real last question. Is there anything that you've thought of during this interview, for example, that might be relevant but hasn't come up? Maybe, you thought of something and then we didn't talk about it.
No, man, you guys have definitely, made me dig down, and just, there's a lot of things that I had never really kind of connected, because, it's like horror is my job, and it's very rare where you like think of your job as like your therapy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
And you guys definitely, it's just very interesting. You guys, that's kind of what you do. And I think that it's very, it's something that I need to kind of sit back and think about for the next couple of days, kind of the connections I've made here. And also really for me, it's like that horror is important in my life. It is like, it's, I feel like, I went to Fantastic Fest a couple of months ago or last month to premiere the movie. And I kind of feel envious of like the real horror geeks that like can sit through like 5 horror movies. Like I can't do that. Like the horror movies traumatize me too much to be able to like sit through a bunch of them. You know what I mean? Like
that's a good thing.
Man.
It means you're still more human.
They wear me out. Like I really do take, most. If a horror movie is trying to make me feel like take something serious, I go along with that. Usually, unless they.
I mean, yeah, that's another way of looking at it. That means that it's that much more effective.
Yeah. So, but it is kind of. You guys have definitely reminded me how important this genre is to me. How perfectly aligned I am, with being a horror filmmaker. Like there's a lot of shit to deal with still. I gotta put in my films.
Well, we're glad we were able to get you to do some thinking.
Yeah, man. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you. And thank you to anybody out there listening. Again, please do come visit us at horrormakesushappy.com. I'll keep this one short and just say, if you like what we're doing, tell somebody.